She wore her scar like armor, certain no one would ever look past it. Until the day a stranger in a suit silenced a room with just one sentence and turned her world upside down. What began as a cruel insult at a diner turned into an unforgettable journey of healing, hope, and the kind of love that doesn't flinch at the broken parts. It embraces them. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The bathroom was small, just big enough for a sink, a mirror, and a battered medicine cabinet that clicked open with a sigh. The mirror, its corners beginning to fog with steam from the running shower, reflected the same ritual every morning. Patricia Anderson stood in front of it, toothbrush in hand, staring at the scar that sliced her right cheek like a memory that refused to fade. It wasn't just a scar. It was a sentence. A mark stamped on her face at 19 that never let her forget. Jagged and pale against her caramel skin, it curved from just beneath her eye down to the edge of her jaw. It puckered when she smiled. It twisted her reflection into something she barely recognized. She used to be beautiful, or at least that's what people told her. Before the accident, her features had been soft, symmetrical. Strangers in her hometown had called her the girl with the movie star face. She remembered how her father used to joke, "You're going to break hearts just walking into a room." He never got to see her grow up. The night of the crash still replayed in her mind sometimes. A rainy highway, a blown tire, the spin, the screams. The impact. She survived. Her father didn't. And in exchange for her life, the universe had left her with a reminder inked into skin and soul. Patricia turned her head slightly, watching how the bathroom light caught the uneven texture of the scar. She leaned closer to the mirror, tracing it with her gaze the way a cartographer might trace a fault line. Sometimes she wished it had landed somewhere else. Her leg, her back, even her arm. Somewhere she could cover. But here it was, always on display. Always inviting stares. Always daring the world to look away or look too long. She pulled her curly hair over her face, tucking it just enough to hide the worst part. Then she wiped away the condensation on the mirror with the towel, only for the same reflection to return. She dabbed on a little concealer, though it never really covered much. Mostly, it made her feel like she was trying, that she hadn't given up. The kitchen clock ticked 6:47 a.m. Time to go. She walked across the tiny apartment, grabbing her work uniform from the hanger by the door. The pale blue-collared shirt, faded black jeans, and her white sneakers, scuffed but dependable, formed her armor. She tied her apron tightly around her waist and checked her reflection one last time in the hallway mirror. Still her. Still the scar. Still breathing. Outside, the sky was a soft gray, and the air smelled like fresh rain and car exhaust. She made the short walk to Ruby's diner, her steps automatic now after 8 years. The same cracked sidewalk. The same sleepy houses. The same stray cat that sat on the fence 3 doors down. Ruby's diner was an old-school roadside eatery on the edge of town, known for its all-day pancakes and bottomless coffee. It had neon signs that buzzed and booths that creaked. But it was also one of the few places that gave her a shot after the accident, back when she was still hiding behind scarves and trembling during interviews. She unlocked the side door and slipped inside. The familiar smell of bacon grease, cinnamon, and freshly brewed coffee greeted her like an old friend. She liked the quiet of the morning shift before customers filled the space with noise and demands. She could pretend the world wasn't watching, that the scar wasn't there. By 7:30 a.m., the breakfast crowd began to trickle in. Construction workers, sleepy nurses finishing night shifts, retired couples with slow routines. Patricia moved between tables like a whisper, quick, polite, invisible. She refilled mugs, remembered orders by heart, and smiled when it was safe to. She was good at disappearing behind her service. But even so, there were always moments, little things, that reminded her she was different. A child's curious stare. A sudden hush when she approached a table. The way some customers avoided eye contact altogether, like looking at her too long might summon their own misfortune. There was no hostility most days, just discomfort. Like her face was a puzzle piece that didn't belong in their cozy picture of morning coffee and pancakes. Still, she endured. Because Ruby's was steady. It didn't judge her. It didn't ask her to be anything but reliable. And on good days, it even felt like home. She was wiping down a booth when Maggie, the diner's elderly owner, called from behind the counter. "Morning, Patricia. You all right?" Patricia glanced up and gave a small nod. "Yeah, just tired." Maggie smiled knowingly, eyes warm. She never asked about the scar. Never brought up the past. She only cared that Patricia showed up, worked hard, and had a kind heart. And sometimes that was enough. But as the bell over the door jingled and a pair of sharply dressed men walked in, laughing too loudly and talking into phones, Patricia felt the usual tension creep into her shoulders. Another day. Another battle. She picked up her notepad, squared her shoulders, and walked to their table. The face in the mirror followed her, quietly, as always. The lunch rush had come early that Thursday. By 11:15 a.m., Ruby's diner was buzzing with its usual midday crowd. Contractors still in their dusty boots, a retired couple playing cribbage in their corner booth, 2 high school seniors working on a project over milkshakes. The clatter of silverware, low hum of conversations, and the hiss of the griddle created the kind of noise that felt oddly comforting. Familiar chaos. Patricia moved through the maze of tables with a practiced grace, carrying 3 plates on one arm and balancing a 4th on her left hand. She paused by a foretop where 2 men in crisp, dark suits had just taken their seats, both still on their phones, speaking over each other like they were competing for airspace. The scent of expensive cologne clashed with the smell of bacon and home fries. She greeted them with her usual smile, small, polite, and brief. "Welcome to Ruby's. Can I get you started with something to drink?" The younger of the 2 waved his hand without looking up, still engaged in whatever business deal he was hyping up. The older one, perhaps in his late 40s, tall and a Rolex that flashed under his cuff, slowly lowered his phone and turned to her. That was when it happened. His eyes locked onto her face. Not her eyes. Not her mouth. Her scar. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he smirked, leaned back against the cracked red leather of the booth, and let out a quiet chuckle. The kind of laugh people reserve for bad jokes or cheap shots. "You know," he said, loud enough for the tables around them to hear, "I didn't realize Ruby's hired Halloween characters year-round." The booth behind him went quiet. Patricia blinked, unsure if she'd heard correctly. Her fingers tightened around the notepad, her pen pausing midair. He leaned forward now, placing both elbows on the table, eyes never leaving the scar. "No offense, sweetheart, but if I came here for lunch and lost my appetite, that's on you. Can't believe they let someone like you serve food. Isn't there a kitchen job you could hide in?" The world seemed to freeze in place. Forks stopped mid-bite. Conversations dimmed to nothing. Even the griddle in the kitchen seemed to hush. Every face near that booth turned toward them, toward her, some with disbelief, some with sympathy, but none with action. Patricia didn't speak. She couldn't. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, a hot flush rising up her neck. The words didn't hurt because they were original. They hurt because they were familiar. Echoes of past taunts. High school bullies. A college roommate's whispered comments. Even the casting agent who once told her, "You're beautiful, but the camera's too honest." But this was louder. Public. Sharp enough to draw blood from her silence. And still no one spoke. Even Maggie, behind the counter, looked frozen in place with a coffee pot half tilted in her hand. The room was paralyzed, and Patricia stood at the center of it, scar on display, humiliation thick in the air. The man in the suit reached for his glass of water with the satisfied smirk of someone who knew he wouldn't be challenged. But then a voice spoke from across the room. Calm. Clear. Authoritative. "I don't think that's funny." It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Patricia turned instinctively toward the sound. In the back corner booth, half hidden by the tall wood-paneled divider, a man was standing up. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 3 inches, a clean-shaven jawline, and a charcoal gray suit tailored to fit with effortless elegance. His tie was loosened just slightly, his tablet still open on the table behind him. He looked like he had stepped out of a magazine ad for minimalist wealth. But it wasn't his appearance that captured attention. It was the weight in his voice, the stillness in his posture. He was the kind of person you noticed when he entered a room, not because he demanded it, but because the air shifted around him. The man walked slowly toward the booth, his gaze steady. The suited customer looked up, eyebrow arched. "Excuse me?" the man said, defensive now. The stranger stopped beside the booth. He didn't yell, didn't raise his hand. He simply stood, the full strength of his presence focused on the man who had insulted Patricia. "I said," the stranger repeated, "I don't think that was funny. In fact, I think you owe her an apology." The air grew thicker. The suited man scoffed, gesturing vaguely. "It was a joke. Lighten up. We're not in church." "Mocking someone's face isn't a joke," the stranger replied calmly. "It's cowardice dressed up as comedy. And what you did, that was cowardly." The two men locked eyes for a long, tense moment. The suited man looked around, realizing the room had turned against him. The laughter he expected hadn't come. His companion had suddenly gone quiet. Even the waitress at the next table was glaring. "I don't need this," he muttered, grabbing his phone. "Let's go." He stormed out, leaving his coffee untouched. The stranger turned to Patricia. He didn't look at the scar. He looked at her. Her eyes. Her hands still trembling slightly. The silent tears she hadn't even realized were forming. "You okay?" he asked gently. Patricia nodded, barely able to form a sound. "Good," he said, offering a small, respectful nod. "You deserve better than that." He walked back to his booth, sat down, and reopened his tablet. The world started moving again. Voices resumed. Dishes clinked. But something inside Patricia shifted. She had been insulted, humiliated, publicly ridiculed. But for the first time in a long time, maybe ever, someone had stood up for her. Not out of pity, not for attention, just because it was right. And for a reason she couldn't quite explain, her heart felt a little less heavy. The rest of the shift passed in a strange sort of haze. Patricia moved through her tables like she was underwater, refilling coffee, dropping off orders, smiling when her face remembered how. But her mind wasn't with her hands anymore. It was across the diner, in the back corner booth where the man in the charcoal suit sat, quiet and focused once again on whatever he was reading on his sleek black tablet. He had returned to his own world, as if nothing had happened. As if defending a stranger in front of a room full of silent witnesses was just a part of his Thursday. Patricia stole glances when she thought he wasn't looking. He wasn't flashy like the man he'd stood up to. There was no watch gleaming on his wrist, no loud phone call or showy gestures. But everything about him said he didn't belong in this little roadside diner. His posture, the sharp cut of his clothes, the way he stirred his coffee once and then set the spoon down with precision. He carried silence like wealth, quietly, effortlessly, powerfully. "Patricia," Maggie's voice called from the kitchen pass. "Corner booth wants the check." Her stomach flipped. She dried her hands on her apron and took a deep breath before walking across the room, notepad in hand. As she neared, she found herself smoothing her hair behind her ear, a reflex she thought she'd trained herself out of years ago. The man looked up when she arrived, meeting her gaze with a steady warmth that caught her off guard. "Hope everything was all right," she said softly, her voice steadier than she expected. He smiled then, not a full, showy grin, but a small curve of the lips that softened his entire face. It was the kind of smile that disarmed people without trying. "It was perfect," he said. "Thank you." He handed her the check. She reached for it, her fingers brushing his, just slightly, and felt an unexpected warmth there. Human. Grounding. "I wanted to say thank you," she said quickly before he could turn back to his tablet. "For earlier. You didn't have to do that." He looked at her again, more closely now. "Yes, I did." There was no hesitation in his voice. No theatrics. Just certainty. Patricia blinked. You didn't even know me. I didn't need to. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the edge of the table, his tone low but sincere. I've seen that kind of behavior before. Cowards who pick on others just to feel taller. Most people ignore it, pretend they didn't hear it, or they laugh to stay comfortable. He paused. But silence gives them permission. And I won't be part of that. She stared at him, unsure what to say. He tilted his head slightly. I hope I didn't embarrass you. No, she said, almost too quickly. No, you didn't. No one's ever really done that for me before. He nodded, not pressing her for more. Just letting the truth hang between them like a thread beginning to form. I'm Damien, he added after a pause. Damien Wells. Her breath caught. The name hit like a slow realization. She'd heard it before, on the news, in the finance pages people left behind at the diner. CEO of Nexra Systems, the tech company that had gone public a few years ago and turned its founder into one of the youngest multimillionaires in the country. But what was someone like him doing in a place like this? You're not from around here, she said, her lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile. His grin returned. No, I'm not. He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. It was simple, his name, email, and a clean black Nexra logo. I come here when I need to think, he said. I own a cabin just outside of town. Quiet helps me figure things out better than a Manhattan office ever could. Patricia studied the card, unsure whether to pocket it or push it back. Should I be intimidated? She asked, only half joking. Damien shook his head. Please don't be. I'm not here to impress anyone. She looked at him again, really looked, and saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Loneliness. Not the empty kind, but the quiet kind that lived in people who were always surrounded by others and still somehow felt unseen. Thank you, Damien, she said softly. He nodded. Patricia, right? She blinked. How did you? I've seen you here before. You remember everyone's orders. You never get flustered. You're the kind of person this place runs on. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but from something warmer. Recognition. Respect. He stood and tucked the card into her hand before she could protest. If you ever want to talk, he said, about anything or nothing, you have my number. Then, with one last smile, he walked out of the diner, the bell over the door chiming softly behind him. Patricia stood still for a moment, the card clutched between her fingers, her pulse fluttering like a leaf in the wind. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like the girl with the scar. She just felt seen. The next morning, Patricia stood at the edge of the parking lot, staring at the business card in her hand. Damien Wells. His name felt like a secret she hadn't meant to learn. The minimalist card had no phone number, just a private email, likely one that filtered through assistants or digital firewalls. She'd stared at it so long the edges had begun to soften from her fingers. In the hush of pre-opening hours, with Maggie humming behind the counter and the fryer still cold, Patricia slipped the card into her apron pocket and tucked it away like a whisper she wasn't ready to speak aloud. Damien didn't come in that day, or the next, but on Monday at 3:14 p.m., a slow hour between lunch and dinner, he returned. Same corner booth, same dark suit, same quiet. Patricia didn't notice him right away. She was wiping down the counter when Maggie leaned in and murmured, "He's back." Corner booth. Asked for you. Her heart thudded. Seriously? Maggie raised an eyebrow. Friend of yours? Patricia only shook her head and smoothed her shirt. She grabbed her notepad and approached him like a diver approaching the edge of a still lake. Damien looked up from his tablet when she arrived. He smiled, warm, unassuming. Hi, Patricia. She managed a small laugh. Most people don't remember their waitress's name after one visit. He shrugged, leaning back in the booth. I'm not most people. Apparently not. She took his drink order, black coffee, no sugar, and when she returned with it, he set the tablet aside, inviting conversation with the simple act of attention. I wasn't sure you'd come back, she admitted as she poured. Neither was I, he said, surprising her with his honesty. But I meant it when I said I come here to think. This place, it grounds me. Ruby's Diner? She said with a smirk. Not exactly the Forbes cover kind of hangout. Damien chuckled, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Exactly why I like it. They talked, slowly, cautiously at first, like two people testing the edges of a fragile glass. She learned that Damien had grown up in Detroit, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs. He built his first app at 14, sold his first company at 24, and by 32, he'd been on more magazine covers than he cared to remember. But there was weariness behind his successes, a kind of emotional fatigue he never named, but that Patricia recognized in the quiet pauses between his words. "What about you?" he asked one afternoon. She hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had asked with real interest. So long since someone looked at her and wanted to know more than what was visible. So she told him. Not all at once. Not in dramatic monologues. But in pieces, like the way sunlight creeps across a floor. She told him about growing up with her father, a mechanic who loved jazz and taught her how to change oil before she could parallel park. About the crash. The months in the hospital. The scar that would never let her forget the moment she survived what he didn't. She told him about college dreams abandoned, about rude comments from strangers, and about how every date she'd ever had ended with a polite decline for a second one. She left out the part where she cried in her car on the way home from those dates. But Damien didn't flinch. He didn't pity her or try to fix her story. He just listened, his eyes never leaving hers. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly one afternoon. "The scar?" she said, tracing it unconsciously with her fingers. He nodded. She looked away. "I used to," she said. "I hated it. Still do some days. But I also survived something most people don't. And it reminds me of that." Damien was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "It's not what I see when I look at you." Her eyes flicked up to meet his. "I see someone strong. Someone kind. And someone who shows up, even when it's hard." The compliment struck something deep in her chest. It wasn't flowery or poetic, but it was real. And real had always meant more to her than beautiful. After that, their meetings became routine. Every few days, he'd show up. Always the corner booth. Always black coffee. Sometimes he worked while she refilled mugs and cleared tables. Sometimes they talked for hours after her shift ended, sitting side by side in the booth like they were both escaping something. One rainy afternoon, he brought her a book, Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. "I read this when I feel stuck," he said. "I thought maybe you'd like it." She turned the pages with reverence, touched more by the gesture than the gift. That night, as the rain slid down her bedroom window like a lullaby, she read the book cover to cover. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in the dark. It started with a sentence. Just 7 words. "Would you let me help with that?" Damien had asked it one evening as they sat in the booth after closing. The lights were dim, the floors freshly mopped, and the neon sign outside the diner window painted the linoleum in pale red and flickering white. Patricia had made them each a mug of cocoa with leftover whipped cream from the dessert fridge. She had laughed at first, deflecting like she always did when she didn't want to hope. Help with what? Getting through another Tuesday. But he didn't laugh back. He looked at her with those serious, searching eyes. With the scar. The silence that followed was thunderous. Patricia stared at him, her mouth slightly open, her chest tight. It wasn't anger she felt, not exactly, but a sudden surge of vulnerability, like someone had opened a window in a house she'd boarded shut long ago. "You think I should get it removed?" she said quietly. Damien shook his head, firm and immediate. "No, that's not what I said. I think you're beautiful. With it. Without it. That's not the point." She looked down into her mug. "I've looked into it before," she admitted. "Specialized reconstruction. Dermatological revisions. Nerve-sensitive areas. It costs more than I make in a year." Damien leaned forward. "I know someone. In Zurich. Top reconstructive surgeon in Europe. If you want it, I could make the arrangements." Patricia blinked. "Switzerland. I'll cover everything," he said. "Flights, hotel, surgery, recovery, whatever you need." No strings. Just the chance to have a choice. She wanted to say no. To protect herself. To keep the scar and the identity she'd built around surviving it. But for the first time, someone was offering her more than sympathy. He was offering her a choice. 3 weeks later, she stood at the gate of JFK International Airport with a passport in her bag, trembling fingers clutching the handle of her suitcase. Damien had insisted on flying her first class, but she still felt like she was playing dress-up in a life that didn't belong to her. The flight was long, the skies smooth, and she barely slept. Her mind was a carousel of what-ifs. What if the surgery went wrong? What if she didn't recognize herself afterward? What if people started looking at her differently, and she hated it? But woven into those fears was a fragile strand of something brighter. What if it worked? She landed in Zurich beneath a pale morning sky, mountains in the distance like the arms of a giant cradling the city. A driver met her at arrivals with her name on a sleek black placard. He handed her a sealed envelope with a handwritten note inside. Rest well today. Dr. Keller will meet you tomorrow. I've arranged for a translator, a care nurse, and your favorite tea. Proud of you. D. Patricia clutched the note like it was a lifeline. The hotel was more like a villa, whitewashed stone, velvet curtains, a view of the lake. She stood on the balcony that night, staring out at the city lights dancing on the water, the alpine air so crisp it felt like she was breathing for the first time. She thought of her father. She whispered to him through the stars, hoping he'd see her from wherever he was. The next day, she met Dr. Keller. He was kind, precise, spoke perfect English. He examined her face with careful hands and a reverent professionalism that eased her nerves. He explained the process in technical detail: laser resurfacing, microtissue grafts, minimal risk, a likely 3-week recovery before long-term results became visible. The day of the surgery arrived like a tide she couldn't stop. She lay in a sterile white room, wires and soft beeping monitors surrounding her. A nurse gently held her hand while the anesthesia took hold. Just before she slipped under, she thought of Damien's voice. It's your choice. Then darkness. She woke up to pain. Not overwhelming, just tightness, heat swelling across her cheek. There were bandages, ice packs, painkillers. Days passed in a blur of sleep, check-ins, slow walks to the window and back. The first time she looked in a mirror, her breath caught. It wasn't gone, some lines remained, but the jagged scar had softened, faded, the redness now a pale pink curve barely visible against her skin. She wept. Quietly. A little every day. Not because the scar was gone, but because for the first time she had made the decision. She had chosen her future. On her 12th day in Switzerland, she received a bouquet of white peonies at her door. No card, just a text from Damien. You always were beautiful, but I hope now you believe it too. They talked every night by video call. Damien would ask about her meals, joke about the nurse's strict soup schedule, and tell her what was going on back in the States, office politics, his latest tech prototype, and how Ruby's had added lemon squares to the menu while she was away. But their conversations drifted deeper. Childhood memories, fears, favorite music, old dreams that still flickered in the dark corners of their minds. She caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, that quiet, still lingering in his eyes. Patricia didn't feel like a project anymore. She felt like a partner, like someone worth knowing, like someone worth loving. The plane touched down at JFK under a hazy gold sunset. Patricia stared out the window as the tarmac rushed beneath her, heart beating fast against her ribs. Not from fear, but something stranger, softer. The city she had left behind just 3 weeks ago suddenly felt unfamiliar, like she'd lived a lifetime between departure and return. The scar was still there, but no longer a raised line that caught the light and pulled at her expression. Now it was faint, a soft shadow of its former self, curving gently along her cheek like an old story that no longer demanded to be told. But the real transformation was beneath her skin. She hadn't just left a piece of herself behind in Zurich. She'd brought someone new home. When she stepped through the terminal doors into the flow of humanity, her eyes scanned the crowd. At first, she didn't see him. Then, "Welcome back," said a voice behind her. She turned. Damien stood there, hands in his coat pockets, wearing a navy blue scarf and the smallest, quietest smile she had ever seen on him. It wasn't his usual polished, camera-ready grin. It was vulnerable, relieved, real. Patricia froze, unsure whether to speak or cry or fall into his arms. "You came," she said. "Of course I came," he replied. They stared at each other for a moment longer than necessary. Then he opened his arms without a word, and she walked into them like she'd been waiting to exhale for weeks. His embrace was warm and steady. Not careful, not distant, but certain. The kind of hug that said, "You are safe. You are wanted." The ride back to town was quiet, the city lights reflecting in the windows of his Tesla like shifting constellations. Damien didn't push conversation. He let her take her time, stealing glances at her when he thought she wasn't looking. "I can't believe you really did all this," Patricia finally whispered. "I didn't do it," he said, keeping his eyes on the road. "You did. I just held the door open." She turned her face toward the glass and smiled, her reflection looking back at her. Still familiar, but no longer haunting. Over the next few days, everything changed and didn't change, all at once. Patricia returned to Ruby's diner. The regulars greeted her with warmth and curiosity, but also restraint, like they knew something had shifted. Some said nothing at all, while others offered quiet compliments. "You look different," said Maggie with a knowing glance. "Not your face. Your energy." Patricia just smiled. Her co-workers hugged her. The younger servers gushed over the subtle changes. A few even cried. But the most surprising reaction came from a quiet man who always ordered the turkey club and sat alone by the window. He handed her a sticky note before he left that said, "You're glowing now. It suits you." The scar wasn't gone, not entirely, but the shame was. And through it all, Damien stayed. Not always at her side, not hovering, but present. Steady. He brought her lunch one afternoon when she forgot to pack her own. He left handwritten notes under her napkin dispenser. He invited her out on slow evening walks by the water where they said nothing, sometimes holding hands, sometimes not. They weren't officially together. There had been no declarations, no "are we dating?" conversation, but something had rooted between them. Something wordless and real. One night, after a long walk beneath the amber streetlights near the lake, he walked her to her apartment door. The air between them was thick with the kind of silence that teeters between friendship and something deeper. He glanced down at her hand, then back at her face. "Patricia." She looked up. He paused. "Can I ask something?" "Always. Do you ever think about who you were before all this? Before the scar, before the surgery?" She thought for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I think about her a lot. I grieve her sometimes. But I also think, maybe I never really lost her. Maybe I just buried her under survival." Damien nodded, his eyes soft and thoughtful. "You didn't lose her," he said. "You became more." And then, gently, without fanfare, he leaned forward and kissed her cheek. Not the untouched side, but the side with the scar. The new one. The one that still held history. Patricia closed her eyes, and for the first time since the accident, she didn't flinch. That night, she couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety. Not from pain. But from a feeling that her heart wasn't used to carrying. Peace. She lay in bed, hand resting softly on her cheek, remembering the touch of Damien's lips, tender, deliberate, and full of things he hadn't yet said. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a beginning. The first time Damien held her hand in public, it was at the town's autumn street fair. It was a crisp Saturday in October. Ruby's had closed early so staff could enjoy the festivities. Caramel apples, local artists, bluegrass bands playing under orange and yellow trees that showered the sidewalks in color. Patricia wasn't planning to go. Crowds still made her uneasy. She didn't like the way strangers stared, didn't trust the little voice in her head that whispered they were always looking. But Damien had shown up at her door that morning with 2 hot ciders and a hopeful smile. "Come on," he said. "We'll just walk. No pressure. No one will even notice." And maybe that would have been true if he hadn't taken her hand halfway down the first vendor row. It wasn't a grand gesture. He didn't look around first. He didn't hesitate. He simply reached out like it was the most natural thing in the world, as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. His fingers slipped between hers, warm and sure. And she let him. At first, she tensed, an old reflex. But then she looked around. People were talking, laughing, buying pumpkin bread and pottery, and petting rescue dogs. No one stopped. No one pointed. No one cared. It was liberating. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like the girl with the scar or the survivor trying to stay invisible. She felt like a woman walking with someone who loved her. Damien bought her a scarf from a booth with hand-woven fabrics. It was burnt orange, soft as breath, and he wrapped it gently around her neck with the kind of care that made her forget how heavy the past had been. "You always know what looks good on me," she said with a shy smile. "That's easy," he replied. "Everything does." The way he said it, so calm, so certain, made her chest flutter. They ate fried dough and split a maple cinnamon funnel cake. They sat on the hood of his car as the sun began to dip behind the trees, golden light catching in her hair. "I've never felt like this before," she said quietly. Damien looked over. "Like what?" "Seen. Safe. Wanted." He didn't smile, didn't joke, didn't brush it off. He just nodded. "Good," he said. "Because you are." After that, they stopped hiding. They went out for dinner, real dinner, at a quiet restaurant with soft jazz and candlelight. Patricia wore a navy blue dress that clung to her curves and left her scar uncovered for the first time in public since she was 19. Damien couldn't take his eyes off her. She caught him watching her during dessert, his thumbs slowly running along the rim of his wine glass. "What?" she asked, smiling into her fork. "I'm just wondering how many people in this room are completely unaware that they're sitting next to the most extraordinary woman here." She laughed, looking down. "Still not used to compliments," she murmured. "Well," he said, leaning forward, "you better start getting used to the truth." They began spending nearly every evening together. Damien would finish calls from his company's West Coast team while Patricia read on his couch, her legs tucked under her. Sometimes they'd cook together. He was shockingly bad at boiling pasta, but she liked the way he listened when she taught him. Other nights they watched movies, their hands tangled under throw blankets, their hearts moving in rhythm without saying a word. She noticed things. He rubbed his neck when he was stressed. He hated silence in the morning, preferring lo-fi jazz as he made coffee. He kept a drawer of hotel key cards from cities all over the world, but rarely traveled anymore. And he always looked at her like she was the most remarkable thing that had ever happened to him. One night, lying on his chest in the quiet glow of his fireplace, Patricia asked, "Why me?" He turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" "You could be with anyone," she whispered. "Women who don't carry trauma, who don't have scars, who don't flinch when someone reaches for their face." He cupped her cheek gently. "I don't want a life that's shiny and easy," he said. "I want one that's real, and strong, and beautiful, even when it hurts." Then he kissed her, slow, unhurried, like a promise. The town began to notice, of course. Some regulars smiled more when they came into Ruby's. Others offered Damien firm handshakes when he waited at the counter for her shift to end. A few nosy townsfolk raised their eyebrows and whispered, but not with cruelty, more with surprise and maybe even admiration. Because they weren't just dating. They were healing. Together. And it showed in the way Patricia walked now. Head high, eyes forward, laughter that came easier. It showed in the way Damien spoke softer, smiled more, and no longer looked like a man carrying the weight of an empire alone. They weren't rushing toward a label. They weren't forcing definitions. But everyone could see it in the way they looked at each other. It was love. Unmistakable. Unapologetic. And open. The garden was lit with strands of warm, golden bulbs strung between aged oak trees. It was early summer, and the air in the small town carried the scent of lilacs and honeysuckle. Crickets sang softly in the hedges, and a string quartet played something slow and timeless just beyond the archway. Beneath a wooden trellis wrapped in white roses, Patricia stood in a simple ivory dress, her hands gently trembling as she held a bouquet of peonies, her favorite. She wasn't nervous. She was overwhelmed. Not by fear, but by the sheer weight of this moment. A moment she had never dared to dream would be hers. There were no paparazzi, no opulence, no fireworks. Just 28 people she loved. Just light and laughter. Just the stars overhead and the man standing at the end of the aisle, looking at her like she was his miracle. Damien. In a black tailored suit, no tie, his collar open, his heart on display. His eyes didn't leave her as she walked down the stone path. Not once. Not even to blink. And every step she took closer to him, Patricia felt more like herself. Not the version she had rebuilt or recovered, her truest self. The one who had always been there, waiting to be known. Her scar, what little remained of it, was visible. By choice. She hadn't covered it. Hadn't asked the makeup artist to blur or blend. It was a part of her, and today wasn't about hiding. Today was about honoring. They stood before the officiant in the twilight, candles flickering and lanterns all around them. Damien reached for her hand. It was warm, solid, familiar. "Patricia," he said, his voice just loud enough for their families and friends to hear. "Before I met you, I thought love was a distraction. I thought peace was something you had to sacrifice to achieve greatness. And then you came into my life, and I realized I'd built an empire with no doors, no windows. You walked in and opened every one of them. You taught me to breathe, to feel, to let someone see me." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "I love your fire. I love your tenderness. I love the fact that you still get nervous speaking in front of people, even though you're braver than anyone I've ever known. I promise to protect you, not because you need protection, but because loving you makes me stronger." Patricia's hand tightened in his. Her eyes shimmered, not with sadness, but with gratitude. "Damien," she said, voice steady despite the tears gathering in her throat, "you didn't rescue me. You didn't try to fix me. You stood beside me while I found my way home to myself. That's the kind of love I never knew existed. I've spent years hiding parts of me because I thought they were broken, but you looked at every crack and called it beautiful." She looked up at him now through tears. "I promise to never hide again. I promise to walk beside you, when the road is easy and when it's hard, when the spotlight is on and when the lights go out. You are my peace, my partner, my person." They exchanged rings. Not extravagant, just simple gold bands engraved on the inside with the words, "I see you." When the officiant finally said, "You may now kiss," Damien didn't hesitate. He leaned in, holding her face gently, reverently. And when their lips met, soft, warm, sure, there was a hush across the garden, as if even the wind paused to listen. Patricia's eyes fluttered closed. And just before she kissed him back, she smiled. Because she knew. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was real. This was earned. Later that night, after the dinner and toasts and dancing beneath the stars, Patricia stepped away from the crowd. She walked barefoot through the grass, the hem of her dress brushing against her ankles, her hand trailing along the rose bushes in bloom. She stopped near the edge of the garden, beneath the tall elm tree where they had taken their first wedding photo. Above her, the sky stretched endless and wide, stars scattered across it like notes on a silent song. Damien came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. She nodded. More than okay. They stood there in silence, watching the night unfold around them. Then she whispered, "Do you ever think, if I hadn't worked at Ruby's or if you hadn't stood up that day, we might have missed each other?" Damien kissed her temple. "Maybe. But I think love finds a way. Even through scars. Especially through scars." She turned in his arms, her hands on his chest. And for the first time in her life, Patricia Anderson didn't feel marked. She felt chosen. She felt whole. And as Damien leaned in once more, their foreheads touching, she knew this was not the end of a story. It was the beginning of a life. Together. 3 years later. Upstate New York. The morning sun crept gently through the kitchen window, painting golden streaks across the hardwood floor. Outside, the world was waking up slowly. Birds calling through the trees, a light breeze rattling the leaves, and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog welcoming the new day. Patricia stood barefoot by the stove, her hair pulled up messily, wearing one of Damien's oversized flannel shirts and her favorite worn leggings. A spatula in one hand, a mug of tea in the other. The air smelled of maple syrup and cinnamon. The farmhouse they had moved into after the wedding was modest by Damien's standards, but it was perfect for them. Set on a few acres, just far enough from town to be quiet, just close enough to feel connected. It had old stone walls, creaky floorboards, a garden they both failed to keep alive most years, and a library where Patricia kept her now growing collection of handwritten journals. And best of all, it had peace. Behind her, tiny feet padded across the kitchen floor. "Mama," came the soft, sleepy voice. She turned with a smile, crouching down as a little girl with dark curls ran into her arms. 4 years old and already full of stories and wild dreams, Sophie Wren Wells was a whirlwind of emotion and sunshine. "Did you have good dreams, bub?" Sophie nodded, yawning into her shoulder. "I was flying." "You always are," Patricia whispered, kissing her daughter's head. A moment later, the back door creaked open. Damien stepped in, hair tousled from his morning run, his sweatshirt damp from dew. He looked older now, more relaxed. His success hadn't slowed. If anything, it had grown, but he had shifted. He took fewer meetings, bought fewer things, slept more, smiled more. He smiled now, seeing them together. "Two of my favorite girls," he said, wrapping his arms around both of them in one sweeping hug. Patricia looked up at him, still amazed that this man, this fierce, quiet, endlessly loyal man, was hers. That all the pain, the years of doubt, the battles against her own reflection, had led to this. "I was thinking," she said later as they sat on the porch swing, Sophie napping inside, "about writing a book." Damien raised an eyebrow, gently pushing the swing with his foot. "About what?" "My story. The scar. The diner. You. Everything." He looked at her for a long moment. "Do it. You really think anyone would care?" He touched her face, still soft, still faintly marked, the way old tree bark tells its age. "Patricia, people don't need perfect stories. They need true ones." She nodded, smiling as she leaned into his side. In the distance, thunder rolled, a summer storm coming in. But here, in this quiet house, in this life they had built from scars and second chances, there was only warmth. She didn't need to be rescued. She just needed to be seen. And she was. Fully. Finally. Forever. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.